Why did you get kicked off social media?
Yeah, well, I said some banned words. I said the phrase, okay, dude. I'm now friends with both the CEO and the owner, so I think that's pretty cool.
So then how do you get in touch with Elon?
One of my friends messaged me on WhatsApp and he was like, hey, how long has Elon been following you on Twitter?
Why do you think all of a sudden you're having all this favor to meet with kings of the earth? Why do you think you're getting put in these positions?
I think it's God's plan. I think it's God's will. I think I was put on this earth to do a lot of things. The actual translation of my full first name translates to God's decision. I take my name seriously. What percentage of people in the world would you say are particularly courageous?
Like shockingly low, let's say. Like I would say less than 10%. Easily.
Okay. And of that 10%, how many of them are very good communicators and very articulate?
Probably 10% of 10%. So 1% of the total.
Now you can stand on a stage at an event in the UK or the USA or Canada or Australia, and you can be like, there are only two genders. And people go wild. No, I don't think men should compete in women's sports, right? If you're a male, I don't think you should be in women's sports. And people are like,
It's funny because now I'm like reflecting. I'm like, are we really that bright or are we just that common sense, you know? But
I think the first time I even heard about the concept of racism, I think maybe I was 8 or 9 years old. And I want to say it was like in my social studies class where we're learning stuff about the history of the USA. I genuinely, and there are people who get upset by me saying this. I don't care. I can't do stuff with white people. Where the heck would I be? To me, it's stupid on multiple levels.
You said a lot of the agendas that we see are demonically inspired. My personal observation is when the world seems to get increasingly dark and the light is dimmed, it makes people ask the question, okay, I wasn't taking the spiritual thing seriously for a while, but now I really want to know because I can see evil running rampant. Hey gang, welcome back to Directed Life. Today, I have a special guest. We have Zuby, who is, he's a really interesting character. He is a creative entrepreneur. He's a hip hop artist. But one thing that's really cool too is he's a podcast host and really God has been using him in a tremendous way to push back some crazy narratives in the world and is using him to speak, if you want to call it this, truth to power and really go against the grain with some very important narratives. And Zuby, I've been checking out your podcast for a while. I've been following you on social media, and it's been really cool to see who you have been able to connect with. And we'll talk about that shortly with, your podcast, Real Talk with Zuby. But I want to open up with this question. Can you share the story with us about how you were kicked off of Twitter a few years ago? What was the story behind that? Why did it happen? What'd you do? Were you like indecently exposing yourself? Why did you get kicked off social media?
Yeah, well, I said some banned words. I said the phrase, okay, dude, followed by an ellipsis, 3 dots. Yeah, I said, okay, dude. That was the statement. That was the full tweet. That was the full tweet that violated their hateful conduct policy. And about 10 days after writing this in response to somebody, I was going back to where I was living at the time on a train back from London down to the south of England. And I saw I had an email from Twitter. So I opened it up and it said, your account has been locked for hateful conduct. And then there was a whole spiel about how it's against the Twitter rules and policies to attack or discriminate against people based on their race, their gender, their sexuality, disability, religious status, all of these things. And I was in my brain thinking, I'm pretty sure I don't do that and I haven't done that. And then it said, this is the tweet that we found violated our hateful conduct policy. And I scroll down and it says, okay, dude. So I'm there thinking, wait, is this a fake email? Is this like some sort of scam? Am I being phished or something? And I tap on the, I exit my email and I tap on the Twitter app on my phone. and I see a screen I've never seen before in the decade plus that I've been on this app. And it just says your account has been locked. And I'm just there like, wait, what? Is this real? Like, and then I was thinking, okay, this must have been some type of mistake. Maybe their algorithm caught something weird, or like surely no human being has kicked me off of Twitter for, I mean, I've said some spicy things on Twitter, but okay, dude is, it's pretty milquetoast. And so I appealed it. And
Pause. Before you get to the appeal, Zuby, what's the context? What were you saying? Okay, you just a random tweet, or were you responding to somebody? What was going on?
The context will make it even funnier. Okay. Because a lot of people ask that. They're like, come on, man. Like, surely you said something else. Like, you must have said something crazy. Okay. So I had a tweet that was going viral, which said, it was something like 5 tips for single ladies on how to land a great guy. I think that's what I titled it. And it had 5 points in it, none very controversial. It was be in good shape, be sweet, learn to cook, grow your hair long, and don't be annoying. And this post was doing what it does on Twitter, right? You know, people are agreeing, disagreeing, fighting me, calling me a misogynist, saying, yeah, this is absolutely great advice. This is how I got my husband and how I keep him, blah, 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 right? All sorts of back and forth. And someone had commented, and it was a verified account. So this is back when most accounts weren't verified. So if someone was verified, it kind of stood out. So I saw a response to it saying something along the lines of, oh, this is terrible advice, and I bet I sleep with more women than you do. And I responded to it and said, okay, dude. And that was it. That was that. And then, like I said, a week and a half later, I'm on a train and I get an email saying that this comment had violated their hateful conduct policy. And so for a couple of days, I was totally locked out of Twitter. I remember I posted about this on Instagram. I sent a message to my email list, just letting people know what was going on. And in the meantime, hashtag free Zuby and hashtag okay dude started trending on Twitter in my absence. I know that Joe Rogan even talked about it on his podcast. That's how I ended up using that intro for my song, Okay Dude. And they basically said, look, this is not a permanent suspension, but if you want to get your account back, you have to delete the offending tweet. So the appeal failed. So I did do an appeal, and they did a manual human review. So a human being looked back at this tweet and decided, nope, that violates our hateful conduct policy. So if I was going to get my account back, which I think had about 250,000 followers at the time, my only option was to delete the post. And so I acquiesced, I deleted it, and had a lot of fun in the follow up to that. But that's the story behind it.
You gave in. Oh, well, I don't blame you, but
I mean, I gave in, and I mean, I came back and made, sold a lot of merchandise off of the back of it, and got my most popular song, which is called "Okay, Dude," out of it.
Oh, that's awesome.
Got another shout out from Joe Rogan. So, like, a lot of good things ended up coming from it, but it was just really bizarre and surreal. I mean, of all the things that I've put out there, for that to be the thing that some human being in San Francisco decided that, yep. It's even more bizarre because of what I was responding to, because I was responding to it kind of like okay, dude, like, okay, this is a weird,
like whatever, like you do.
It's a bit of a weird thing. I'm not here, bragging about, sleeping with a whole bunch of women or something. So it was just a strange reply as to like, this person, this individual is bragging about this. And I'm just like, okay.
Okay, I want to ask you a business question, because I love that you turned it into merch. That is so gangster. Do you know, like, off the top of your head, how much money did you make off of the merch from that situation?
About $20,000.
Helpful. That's awesome, bro.
It's not bad.
So what year was that?
That was 2021.
Okay, so that was before Elon Musk actually purchased Twitter.
Oh yeah. No, this wouldn't have happened under the new guard. This is when the walls were massively closing in. This is when things were super weird, and there was a lot of censorship going on. I'd had all sorts of weird things happening with my account. My account had been throttled prior to that, and I'd fallen foul of various things. But this was the one where they thought, okay, we can go get him. But hey, I'm now friends with both the CEO and the owner. So I think that's pretty cool.
So, okay, now how did that happen? How did you get connected with Elon? Was it he let your account free, or you got your account free because you were willing to delete that post? So then how do you get in touch with Elon?
Yeah, sure. So this is last year. So no. So this would be going back to 2022 now, 2022. So late 2022, I just started noticing Elon responding to some of my tweets. Like I was following him, obviously. He wasn't following me at the time, but I had a few posts that I put out there and I'd look in the comments and Elon Musk is in there. And I'm like, oh, wow. Okay, cool. Yo, Elon just responded to my tweets. It happened once. It happened twice. It happened several times. And we had a few back and forths. And then I think it was January or February last year. One of my friends messaged me on WhatsApp and he was like, hey, how long has Elon been following you on Twitter? And I was like, wait, what? Elon follows me on Twitter? And I clicked on his account and I was one of the 250 or so accounts that he was following. So he just started following me one day. And that same day he responded to another one of my tweets and then he DM'd me. And so we just got chatting in the DMs. I was like, oh, wow, like, cool. Elon Musk just slid into my DMs. So I'm just having a conversation with him. And I was, yeah, and pretty early, like everyone's like, oh, how did you get him on his podcast? How did you get him on your podcast? Whatever. So I just asked him. I just say, hey, I've got a podcast. It's called Real Talk with Zuby. I'd love to have you on it sometime. I know you're a busy man, but if you've got time, I'd love to have you on it. And he just wrote back, sure. And so I was like, sweet, okay. And then it was just a matter of
anticlimactic, but amazing.
Then it was just a matter of logistics. It was just, okay, cool. Like I was in the UK at the time. So I was like, cool, I'll let you know when I'm next in the States. I'm happy to come to you, obviously, whether you're in Texas, whether you're in California, whatever it is. And then it was just a matter of back and forth, locked in a date, locked in a time. We had to move it from the initial time, had to push it back a week because I think he had some business in China and had to stay out there a little longer than planned. So, yeah, we did it. I went to San Francisco. It was still called Twitter at the time. This was before the X rebrand. So that was, May or June last year, if I remember correctly. I think mid-June last year or early June last year. So, yeah, I went out there, sat down with him in the evening. We recorded the whole podcast and many millions of people listened to it. So that's how that connection came. And then Linda Yaccarino, who is the new CEO of X, she responds to quite a lot of my stuff. I haven't had a chance to meet her in person, but she seems really cool. She replies to a lot of my stuff. She seems like a nice lady. So yeah, that's cool too.
That is really cool. So now he follows you, and I'll tell you what, that's been one of probably the easiest ways for me to see and become more familiar with your content, because Elon was like regularly retweeting you. So
yeah, he shares my stuff quite a lot.
Yeah, he does. And are you still in contact with him kind of on a regular basis, or is it just more through the retweets?
It's mostly through X, but I mean, if I message him, he'll reply. Like we chat. He also was my when they turned on the subscribers on X as well. He was also the first person to subscribe, like as a paid subscriber to my account. So he was my first subscriber as well. So that's pretty cool as well. And even if I message, like I post something on my subscribers, sometimes, he'll join in the conversation. So it's cool, man. It's kind of weird. But it's cool. I guess not just him, but I'm truly fascinated by the range of people I've been connected to, particularly over the last 5 years. I was just thinking yesterday that I've met almost every single person I want to meet, which is pretty crazy. There's still many people out there, who I'd love to meet and connect with in person. But if I think back to 5 or 6 years ago, and I think if you sat me down 5 years ago and asked me who are the most interesting, like living people today that you'd want to meet and connect with, I can now say I've met most of them, and not just met them.
Who would be some of the people on that list?
Sure. Well, Elon Musk is definitely on there. I definitely would have said Jordan Peterson. Met him several times in the past few weeks, actually.
Wow.
I probably would have said Tucker Carlson, maybe like Ben Shapiro and the Daily Wire guys. I've met all of them multiple times and interviewed several of them. who else would be on that list? You know, musician wise, I guess Tech Nine would be on there. I met him earlier than 5 years ago. I know I'd like to meet Trump. I haven't met Trump yet. I've been to the White House a couple of times when he was the president, but I didn't actually get a chance to meet him because he wasn't there. I met RFK Jr. over the weekend. That was cool.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, like just a lot of interesting thinkers. Like I met, you know, both the Weinstein brothers, Brett and Eric. They're really cool guys. But it's been interesting, man. Just so many people who I'm interested in, you know, who I respect and admire in terms of the way that they think. Oh, dude, Joe Rogan, of course. How could I forget Joe Rogan? Yeah, I've met Joe Rogan and hung out with him multiple times. So there's a lot of people who, you know, I've consumed tons of their, I hate the word content because it's so overused, but, you know, I follow their work. I like the way that they think. I like what they represent. Tulsi Gabbard, met her a bunch of times. She's awesome. There's just a lot of cool people out there. And not everyone who's like even necessarily famous per se, right? It's not a fame thing. It's just like I admire and I respect what this person is doing and they're putting themselves out there in a unique way. I'm sure there's tons of people I'm sort of missing listing off here, but it's cool going through this transition where you find that so many of the people who you like and admire and respect, the feeling is mutual. And yeah, that's pretty cool. I've had times where I'm in a city and, you know, the CEO of some massive multi-billion-dollar company was like, "Hey, Zuby, I see you're in town. Like, let's hang out." You know, I'm just like, and I'm a little bit like, wait, I know who this is. Like, isn't this guy the CEO of insert very well-known company here? And they just want to meet me and hang out. And I'm just like, okay, I don't know exactly what this means. I don't know exactly what I'm doing in the world, which is bringing these people on, putting me on all of these people's radar. But it's interesting, man. It's interesting. And this is the power. This is the positive power of these platforms and podcasts and social media and all of that.
Well, one thing I would say is, you know, you are, if I can just honor you and celebrate you, I think one thing that's really special about you and your voice is, yes, you are speaking very unashamedly about your perspective on things. And we'll get to like more deeply how your faith plays a component in that, how I don't want to put a political label on you, but it seems like there's a lot of, you lean more conservatively on certain things happening in culture. And it feels like, I think for people that would agree with those perspectives, it feels like the world is stacked up against them. So any voice that's coming out and is willing to be bold and represent those worldviews, it's like, there's a blue ocean for that. People are really hungry for that, but not everybody does it with as much tact and humility and grace and with a winsome countenance and approach like you do. And I think that's what's probably helping you out. But I'd love to hear your perspective. Like, what do you think is, why do you think all of a sudden you're having all this favor to meet with, really, if you want to call it, like kings of the earth? Why do you think you're getting put in these positions?
Wow. Well, firstly, thank you. I appreciate those kind words. I think that, you know, the first answer I will give is, I think it's God's plan. I think it's God's will. I think I was put on this earth to do a lot of things. The actual translation of my full first name translates to God's decision. And I take my name seriously. So when I was in my teens, even when I just started getting into music and everything, I was always like, man, I need to live up to my name, right? I need to make some sort of dent and impact in this world. And I want to have some type of positive influence, ideally on millions of people, not in a prideful way or just for the sake of quote unquote fame, but because I have the capacity and the potential to do that. And I've been given certain gifts and a certain personality and a certain range of unique experiences that I can speak from. And no one else has that exact same combination of things. So it's not just that it would be good for me to use my voice in this regard. I'm like, it would be unethical for me not to. right? It would be having the candle burning and, covering it up. It's like, no, I've got that light, so let me get out there and do what I can to get it out to people. So that's how I think of it. And then in terms of the sort of hunger for it and why it's attracting people, I think about this a lot myself, and I don't know the exact answer. But I think some of it is, you've touched on a few things, but I think when you think of the idea of talent and personality stacking, you find that certain combinations are extremely rare. So what percentage of people in the world would you say are particularly courageous?
Me? What would I say?
Yeah, what would you say? Even if it's just like in terms of their words and how they stand up for things.
I would like shockingly low, let's say. Like I would say less than 10% easily.
Okay. And of that 10%, how many of them are very good communicators and very articulate?
Probably 10% of 10%. So 1% of the total.
Yeah. And of that, how many of them are, particularly motivated and have a drive to do something, right? So I think when you stack certain elements and then you add on top personality and you add on top, whether it's musical ability, communicating ability, I've got an interesting background which allows me to relate to people all over the earth. I was born in England. I grew up in Saudi Arabia. I went to American schools and British schools. I studied at Oxford University. I've done all this stuff with my music. I'm in podcasting. I'm at the intersection of all these different worlds: politics, culture, music, Bitcoin, society, religion, whatever. I can appear on any podcast that exists and have an interesting conversation. And so I think it's put me in this just a unique point where people are like, okay, this individual is interesting. I know that there are a lot of, so say, for example, just the absence of courage, right? So there are people who they're courageous, but they don't know how to communicate, or they don't have the platform. Or there's people who have a platform and they're good communicators, but they're not courageous, or they're just super woke, right? They're just going along with the whatever's. They just go with the wind, right? Most celebrities would fall into this, right? They have the platform. Maybe they're great at communicating. Tons of people know who they are, but they don't have maybe they don't have, their beliefs and values may not align with ours. But even if they do they have the courage and the boldness to come out there in public and just say what they want to say and to challenge certain narratives and to ask certain questions? Very few do, which is why you could probably count on two hands the number of major celebrities who have even taken a stand against some of the most pressing issues of our time, right? It's a very, very small number. So, but across the world, there are millions of people, billions of people who share some of our values or some of our thoughts and thinking. And so they are looking for people. They're looking for individuals who can articulate their thoughts and their ideas. And certainly one talent that God has blessed me with is the ability to concisely get rather complicated points across in a way that is easy to understand and tactful and not overly aggressive or overly polarizing. There's a dash of humor in there sometimes. I think a lot of this is a skill of actually being a rapper, because it's you learn how to sort of take you learn how to sort of take all of these ideas and experiences and things and put it together in really sort of pithy but smart, witty phrases. And when people are like, "Oh man, how are you get so good at tweeting? Like, how can you just condense these ideas?" I'm like, well, it's like rapping, but even easier, because it doesn't even have to rhyme.
Yeah, and you don't have to get it on a beat. It's just here's the raw thought.
No, it's just like, here's an idea, boom, let me condense that to 140, 100, 280 characters. And it's fairly simple to do. And I've been doing it for a long time. So I'm glad it's resonating with people. Like that's the way I analyze it myself. I don't know exactly what's going on in this day and age that we're living in. There's a whole new, unique, you're part of it, man. This whole new, unique media landscape and the ability to reach thousands, millions of people all across the world just by sharing your personality, sharing your thoughts, sharing your beliefs. whether, whatever medium it is, audio, video, writing, imagery, whatever the case may be. So we're on the frontier of something new and unique, and I'm happy I'm able to contribute to it. And I'm glad that people are finding some type of positivity and value in it, because, I'm not perfect with it, but that's certainly what I seek to do.
Your name, you said, means God's decision. Mm-hmm. At what point, what was the turning point in your life/career? You tell me, whatever your story is, your story. What was the turning point in your life/career where you started to realize, okay, I am here to represent God's perspective on the earth and not just talk about what I want to talk about or rap about what I want to rap about?
That is a brilliant question. And I would say that it wasn't a single moment. I'd say from the beginning, when I started rapping, which is when I was 18, 19 years old, my music it's always been positive. You can go back and listen to my music from 2006, 2007, 2008, and you'll see, oh, wow, like Zuby's always been, he's kind of been talking about a lot of the stuff people may now know me for a pretty long time. And I think over the course of time, I've I've naturally matured, and I've grown in my faith. I've grown in my worldview. At the same time, the world has also become a lot goofier in many ways. If you think of what the world or what your country was like in 2006 or 2010 or even maybe 2012, it wasn't as polarized. It wasn't as divided. It wasn't as a lot of the narratives that have been popping up over the last 8 or 9 years in particular, they hadn't really been formed and fleshed out. It wasn't really, there's a lot of things that are things now, and they just weren't really a thing 15 years ago. You kind of see what I mean? So yep. The world, so I've kind of largely stood still, but the world has just kind of shifted and moved, and the culture has changed around me to the point where, I think 80% of the things that I say that go viral, if I'd said them, and I did say them 15 years ago, no one really cared. Like, it wasn't, there was nothing profound about it. There was nothing brave or courageous about it. There was nothing necessarily sort of countercultural around it. I often make the joke that, I'm just a normal person from 2005. Like, I'm not some, none of my beliefs are particularly sort of radical or crazy or anything. It's like, now you can stand on a stage at an event in the UK or the USA or Canada or Australia, and you can be like, there are only 2 genders, and people go wild. Right? And the crowd goes nuts. The conservative crowd is going crazy. You know what I mean? And you're just like, what has happened? Where that statement, well, number one, even there's even any idea it needs to be said, and number two, like it's
sorry. Have you ever heard of that movie, Idiocracy?
Yes, I have.
Yes,
I've seen it.
It feels like we're living that movie right now. It's so crazy.
It's weird. It's really, really weird. And people are like, oh, wow, that's courageous. That guy's so courageous. He said that there's only 2 genders. And you're just thinking, where are we? Like, how is that a countercultural thing? How's that something that celebrities are afraid to say because they might get canceled? I don't think men should compete in women's sports, right? If you're a male, I don't think you should be in women's sports. And people are like, oh my gosh, that's such a, it's crazy. I'm sure about my viral deadlift stunt. That was 5 and a half.
Talk about that though. I've seen it, but I'd love for the audience to get some context.
Yeah, sure. So this is one of the things that put me on a lot of these people's radar. It's how Joe Rogan discovered me. It's how Tucker discovered me. It's how Ben Shapiro discovered me. So back in February 2019, I just had a tweet. It was a 9-second video of me doing a 230 kilo deadlift, which is, I think, somewhere around 515 pounds, something like that. It was just a tweet, and I wrote something like, I keep hearing about how biological men have no strength advantage over women in 2019. So watch me destroy the British women's deadlift record without trying. P.S. I identified as a woman whilst lifting the weight. Don't be a bigot. So,
oh my gosh, dude.
So I just posted that.
Dude,
I posted that. Like I had, at the time I had 18,000 followers on Twitter. And I thought, this is going to get a couple of LOLs, a couple of likes. I find it funny. My audience will find it kind of funny. I did not know that video was going to go on to get millions upon millions of views and be seen across like different countries. It was going viral in multiple countries. And it led to all of these podcast appearances and media coverage, BBC, Sky News, Fox News, like all of these different people just started reaching out to me. And I was just like, this is bonkers. And it's even more crazy now to just think, we're in October 2024 now as we record this. So this is over 5.5 years ago. And this so-called issue is still raging on. There's still a whole debate in our countries and others about if a male should be allowed to compete in female sports. Like this is where most of the world looks at the West and they just laugh at us because they're just like, what on earth are you guys doing? How have you been having this debate for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years about how many genders there are and if men and women are different and if you can just turn into one from the other, all of these things. And the fact that to just say the basic things I'm saying, there's people out there who will be saying that this is transphobic and this is hateful and this is, this person should be banned or this person should be censored for just stating very basic truths. There's nothing political. I haven't said anything political here. I'm just saying like biological reality, just really basic facts. And we're living in a time where, there's just these preposterous ideas floating around and people, strangely, the average person is still afraid. The pendulum is starting to swing back, but the average person is still afraid to just say, hey, there's a lot of issues where we can have debates and where there's a lot of gray zones and things are a bit complicated and confusing. This is not one of them. This is like just one of the most clear-cut things that exists, not even just in humans, but across the whole, like animals, all animals. This is just like a simple thing, sexual dimorphism. And we've known about it since before people knew what science even was. A 3-year-old can tell you the difference between male and female. Right. But the adults in the room supposedly are just pretending that we don't know. Let's put some tampons in the boys' bathroom because that's important.
You're starting to make my blood boil, bro. We gotta cool it down a little bit. But you've had the privilege recently, Zuby, of being able to connect with some of these really bright minds of our generation. And it's funny because now I'm like reflecting. I'm like, are we really that bright, or are we just that common sense? But here we are. The brightest minds are saying some of the most basic fundamental truths from these conversations that you're having with people, perhaps backstage or on a podcast or offline. What's the consensus that people are saying is the why? What's the motivation? Like how are things spiraling out of control so quickly? I mean, you made a very astute observation. I'm old enough to remember 15 years ago, like you said, a lot of the things we're talking about right now were so fringe. So fringe it wasn't even worth talking about. Now it's mainstream. It's in our faces all the time. Has there been any sort of discussion or thread that you're seeing as far as why people think this is even happening right now?
There's different theories. I have my own ideas about it as well. And I don't think many people have sort of heard my idea of why I think this is happening. But, the sort of standard things are, okay, well, a lot of these seeds were planted back in academia many decades ago. So concepts like postmodernism, queer theory, gender theory, these sort of fringe, pseudo-intellectual, sort of sociological topics, they're not new. Like these ideas came before either of us were alive, but they were always just very fringe and very limited to academia, right? Maybe you meet someone who's doing a gender studies minor or major in 1995, and they've heard of some of these concepts, but it's not mainstream at all. Corporations aren't on board with it. There's no government policy about it, anything like that. And then there was a massive mainstreaming of it starting, well, maybe not starting, but particularly in the mid 2010s. You remember, I'll tell you what, for this particular issue, when it really went mainstream was the whole Caitlyn Jenner thing. Mm-hmm. I think that was 2015, if I remember correctly, when the person formerly known as Bruce Jenner suddenly, after 60 plus years of life, announced that, hey, I'm a woman and my name is Caitlyn, and all of a sudden winning Woman of the Year, hasn't even been a woman for a year, magazine covers, media interviews, all of this. And I remember all of this at this time. And I was like, no one is asking any questions here. No one is even asking,
right.
This person comes out and says, hey, I identify as a woman. To me, the first question there is just like, what does that mean? You have fathered multiple children. You've won multiple Olympic gold medals in the male category. You're male. When you say that, what exactly do you mean by that? Like, how long have you felt this way? Like, there's a whole story here, but instead it was just like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Affirm, affirm, affirm. She, her, brave. You can't even say the name Bruce because that's dead naming now, and that's hateful. And it was just like they just paraded this individual around. And that's when the sort of concept of transgenderism went really mainstream. Outside of that, you have the other branches of sort of basket of terrible goods that people now call wokeness. You have the sort of racial theories coming out as well, some critical race theory ideas, this idea that's, and I'd say even some of this might even predate. Some of it might even predate some of the sort of gender concepts, but you have the sort of extremes and overreaches of feminism. You have the extremes and overreaches of racial theory and this sort of worldview that, all white people are privileged and play a role in white supremacy. And if you're not an explicitly anti-racist, you're racist, and all black people are oppressed. And we should see the world as, white people versus people of color or BIPOC or whatever. You throw in the whole Latin X nonsense in there. Like, just all of these things, like in the mid 2010s, they just started bombarding people with all of these ideas. And I think the reason why it really took root is because, I think people were somewhat caught off guard. I think it took a while it took several years for people to realize, like, how deep and consequential even is this? Is this just some young kids and students throwing out some goofy ideas? And if so, people kind of just shrug and they're like, whatever, it doesn't affect me. And then time goes on and they see the censorship and they see that, wait, someone is being called hateful or being called a bigot because they said there's two genders, or they said that men don't get pregnant. Wait, that's kind of weird. Wait, Canada is passing laws saying that if you don't call someone by the pronoun they tell you to, that you could be fined or go to prison. Wait, like, whoa, that's strange. Hey, wait, you're teaching my children what? And then there was a big awakening during that whole pandemic period where a lot of kids were doing homeschooling. And I think a lot of parents in their house, got to see how far some of this stuff was going. And so there's been an increased awakening just in the past few years of people going, oh, wait, no. This is going way too far, right? You want to push this stuff, not just, this has gone way beyond the concept of, hey, adults in general, if you're not hurting other people, generally speaking, you can do what you want to do. Like, that's not it's gone way beyond that. Now it's like, no, this must be celebrated. Oh, and by the way, we're going to push this on your kids too. In fact, we're not just going to push this on your kids. We are going to take your kids from you. If you have a child who has some sort of gender confusion or gender dysmorphia, or you as a father say, actually, no, you're a father in California, and you say, no, I don't want my 14-year-old having puberty blockers or any of this stuff, right? All of a sudden, wait, now you're the enemy of the state. Now you're getting, child protection. And these are real stories. This is real stuff that's happening. I know. You're now getting child protection at your door.
Just got passed in California recently that you're talking about, where teachers are legally unobligated to tell parents if their kid is changing their name or changing their gender in school. So now the state is really has more rights than you do as a parent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So all of these things are waking people up, so just to answer your question directly, there's the apathy at the beginning. there's a combination of apathy, disbelief, and cowardice. So there are people who are just unaware. They don't really know that it's going on. And then there's people who are aware, but they're kind of apathetic. They have that kind of, well, it doesn't affect me, so I've got bigger fish to fry. I understand that. I've got bigger fish to fry. Like, I've got work to do. I can't be worrying about the bathroom policies or whatever. And then it gets to a point where it sort of hits people in the face. And even at that point, a lot of people just lack the courage, coming back to what we were saying earlier. Some people know, hey, this is not right. This is not good. I have concerns about this, but they're afraid to voice it. They don't want to get canceled. They don't want to risk being fired from their job. They don't even want to be called a name. They don't want to be called a transphobe. They don't want to be called a bigot. They don't want to be called anti-LGBT, gosh, what's the acronym now? LGBT or whatever.
Yeah, can't even keep track anymore.
Yeah, they don't want to deal with all of this smoke. And so it encroaches. And the truth is, a very small intransigent minority can have an overwhelming impact on a culture and a society and a nation. If you've got if you've got like a small group of people who really believe these ideas and they're pushing them hard and they're activists and they're working on this every single day, and then the vast majority of people are just like, okay, they're kind of shrugging their shoulders or they're certainly not speaking up, then those ideas, particularly with the power of social media, those ideas can go mainstream a lot quicker. The speed from which an idea can go from fringe to mainstream, I think, has massively increased. I think, 20, 30, 50 years ago, that process maybe took it took decades. And now you could have some weird idea that people start talking about in 2024. And by, 2025, 2026, it's really caught a lot of steam and got millions of people, backing it and shouting it. I mean, dude, look at remember a couple of years ago, remember the defund the police thing? Like, where did that come from?
Of course.
Who was saying that? Who was saying that in 2018? Nobody. And then by mid 2020, you've got people, not even just in the US, even in the UK, people are, defund the police, all cops are bad, And you're like, wait, where did this idea come from? Some people even saying abolish the police. And you're just like, that is new. That's a strange, right? Like, that's a strange fringe concept. Like, that does not really compute. And it caught a lot of steam. And hey, if you weren't on board, at least if you didn't post the black square and, do all the stuff you're supposed to do, now you're a bad person. Now you're racist. And now you're, and again, a few years later, it's mostly died out. It's mostly died out at this point. But mid 2020, it was just like, hey, if you're not on board with this whole thing, if you don't put up the black square, if you don't support BLM, if you don't take the knee, if you don't do all this, you're a bad person. You're a racist. You're now a white supremacist. Even if you're not even white, you're a white supremacist. And yeah, I don't know, man. Strange times. Very, very strange times.
If you're an individual who loves my perspective on things happening in the world, particularly through a spiritual perspective, but you're not able to easily get a hold of me in the comments on YouTube or on Instagram or other social media profiles, trust me, I also feel very frustrated about that. I try my best to respond to all of them as quickly as possible, but with the amount that comes through, it becomes very challenging. But I have an option for you. If you're very serious about getting my expert advice on anything related to entrepreneurship, relationships, social media, current events, or even anything spiritual at all, I've just created a profile on an app called Connect, and this will allow you to connect with me via text message or video message, or even schedule a video call, and I can respond to you in as little as 24 hours. So my invitation to you is to go to Connect.com or download the Connect app to your phone. Search my name, it's pretty easy to find, Kap Chatfield, KapChatfield, and feel free to ask me any question. I would love to be able to answer that question for you as soon as possible. So please do that today. You can download the app from any app store, or you can click the link in the description of this episode or this video to ask me any question on Connect today. Now back to the episode. Well, speaking of the race topic, for those who are listening and not watching, if you didn't know, Zuby's actually black. So he is a different melanin skin color than I am. So this will be interesting. But you recently had Matt Walsh on your podcast to talk about his new movie, Am I a Racist? And I'll tell you what, man, like that's the race topic is something that I really enjoy talking about because it's such an it's already being talked about everywhere, but I do not typically have that conversation on a podcast platform when it's just me and another white person talking about it, because that optic is like it says media suicide basically. So if you would humor me because you brought it up a few times, I also think it's interesting that you kind of have like these different social passports. You probably have multiple real passports, but you have like social passports where you grew up in the UK, or you're born in the UK. You currently live in Saudi Arabia, right?
I live in United Arab Emirates, UAE.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So you live in that part of the world. You went to American schools. You're very involved in the culture, especially from a hip hop perspective, a music perspective. Your ability to think about the whole narrative of race is extremely objective. Like you're able to get outside of the, the emotion of it, and you're able to look at it from a 30,000 foot view and talk about it very objectively, which is extremely refreshing. But I would love to hear your candid thoughts on, like, did that kind of have a same sort of a whirlwind effect over the past handful of years? Because for me, I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area for most of my life up until I was 18. And what was interesting was I didn't even realize this until a couple years ago. I helped my parents move. And when I was helping my parents move, like we were going through all of these photos. We had all of these photos that we were kind of sorting and like kind of organizing. And I was finding all of these photos from when I was in elementary school, like the class photos. And I was looking at these class photos, and it never occurred to me back then until now that I was actually technically the minority ethnically in my classes. That we had Hispanic kids, we had African American kids, we had Asian kids, and then we had a few white kids, Caucasian kids. And I never thought about it back then. It was never like, oh, I'm like the only white kid in my class or the only one of 3 white kids. But now on the other side, I see these photos. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, was reality different in the 90s when it came to this topic? Or was I just so young that I was naive to what was going on? It seems like as we're getting more progressive, it seems like we're actually becoming more regressive in this conversation about equality and things like that. So I'd love for you, if you can pull from your conversation with Matt Walsh in this recent documentary that he did. But as somebody who has come from all these different backgrounds, and you're also in an industry with your music that is predominantly an African American or Black industry or genre, I should say. What's your take on all of that stuff?
Wow, this is a big question, Kap. I mean,
oh yeah,
it's interesting that you say that it's an interesting topic for you to talk about, because I almost kind of feel the opposite, because I don't have that much to say on it. I only have things to say because other people have dumb stuff to say. So I have to sort of counteract it with some common sense. Like yourself, I grew up in an extraordinarily mixed environment. I mean, from the age of 3 or 4, I mean, if you look at my preschool photos, it looks like a mini UN, like, preschool in Saudi Arabia. You have kids from every single continent, different religious backgrounds. You have kids from Muslim families, Christian families, Hindu families, from people from parts of Africa, or from China, from Asia, from America, Canada, other Middle Eastern countries, European countries, and nobody cared. Like, nobody cared. Certainly none of the kids cared. But even in the wider community, it just wasn't a thing. Like, I've had friends from every background since I was a small child. I think the first time I even heard about the concept of racism, I think maybe I was 8 or 9 years old. And I want to say it was like in my social studies class where we're learning stuff about the history of the USA. And I remember learning some stuff about like Nazi Germany and how they treated Jewish people and others. And I remember this just sort of confusion, not even just with me, but like with all the kids of, wait, like people treated each other badly because they looked different because they had different skin colors. Like it was this sort of like mind-blowing concept to all of us young kids we've all just grown up surrounded by each other and we're all friends and whatever. And we're just like, this is weird. Like, what was wrong with those people in the past or whatever? So I'll be honest with you. I still have the same view all these years later about racism, whether it's the sort of old school right-wing conservative version or it's the new school left-wing progressive version. I consider them both racism. And I still think it's the same. I just think it's one of the most low IQ, low resolution worldviews that somebody can have. No. So, it's an odd question for me to even answer because like I genuinely, and there are people who get upset by me saying this. I don't care about race. Like I genuinely don't. I understand that there are other people out there who do, right? I'm well aware of that. But as far as I'm concerned, of all the things that, when I look at humanity and I think of all the places I've traveled to and all the hundreds of thousands of people I've met, I've been to 45 countries at this point, across, every continent except Antarctica. And the idea that someone's worth or value or something about their character or their core personality or anything is even correlated to their skin color or their ethnic background or something, it's just so stupid to me. It's just wrong. Like it's just flat out wrong. And also it's anti-human. It's anti-Christian for sure. It's not conducive to anything. And it's also very, I'll tell you what it is as well, is it's very life limiting. It's very, very life limiting. There are many people in this world. There are millions of people in the USA, for example, who artificially limit their lives because they're so hung up on some of this topic, right? So there will be people who are Black Americans who are just like, I don't really mess with white people. And I'm like, okay, so you want to shun the majority of the population, right? You've got this hang up and you don't want to be friends with, associate with, work with, right? Befriend, whatever, because of that. So you only want to like hang out with people you only want to hang out with people in your demographic. That's 13, 14% of the population that you're sort of like allowing yourself to hang out with or allowing yourself to be inspired by. So just that alone, it's like, all right, you can do that if you want. I mean, freedom of association exists, but it's like you are artificially handicapping your own life in so many ways. If I think about the people I'm connected to, from friends to followers to family members to people who have helped me with things in my career, people I've interviewed on my podcast or been interviewed by like if I had this thing in my brain where I was like, oh no, like I can't do stuff with white people, where the heck would I be? Even more so in England, like England, even more in England, right? Because like Black people are like 1.5% of the population. It's just like, that's just, to me, it's stupid on multiple levels, right? It's not even like just on one level. It's like on all of these levels, I'm just like, that is just wrong and dumb. It's like, why would you do that? Or even the people who you can be inspired by, right? Like, why would you have to be, the person has to look like me for me to be inspired by them? I don't buy into it at all. And I just think like, people are entitled to have whatever worldview they have. And I go as far as to say, people are even entitled to their biases and their prejudices or whatever. If there's someone out there who's like, I don't want to talk to Zuby because he's Black. I'm like, all right, bro, don't talk to me. Like you're right. It's cool. I'm not trying to like force anything here. But it's just like, okay, that's strange and that's weird and that's limiting. And you're cutting off a lot of wonderful potential people and friends and people who could probably help you in all sorts of ways if you didn't have this thing in your head. I don't like to do that. It's current year, but it's 2024. Like, are we still, it's not 1824. Like, are we still really, running with this? So I don't like the way that it's been. I totally agree with you that in the 90s and I think in the early 2000s, I've said many times that humanity peaked in the late 90s or the early 2000s. I'm dead serious here. At least temporarily.
I feel you.
At least temporarily. And again, I think I know why that is. I think it's because there was this roughly 20-year period where we had gotten past genuine bigotry, like the worst of racism and segregation and brutal homophobia and actual real misogyny and whatever. Our societies had generally gotten past that in the West, but also we hadn't yet been hit by wokeness. We hadn't yet been hit by smartphones and social media obsession and whatever. So, right. So we had this zone of like 20 minutes where there's tons of creativity. There's tons of unity. There's just like all this exciting stuff going on, all this opportunity. Everyone's generally people are like getting on with each other. And I think there was a lot of optimism, and now it's reversed course, right? As you said, it's progressed so much that, the progressives are trying to regress society in many ways. People have gotten past quote unquote seeing color, right? We've achieved the sort of general color blindness. And then they're like, no. Color blindness is just another form of racism. So actually, no, you as a white person, you need to behave this way and you need to see it this way. And oh, you as a black person, this is the way the world is, and this is how the systems and the structures, even if you don't notice that they're out to get you, no, they're out to get you, right? White people have this thing called white privilege, and all of the systems, the whole USA is a white supremacist society. Like, there's people who will say this with a straight face. Mm-hmm. And you're just like, well, every single thing you've just said there is nonsense. And also, like I said, if someone is to adopt that worldview, it's not good for them. It's not good for their kids. It's not good for their friendships. It's not good for other people around them. If you start putting it into policy, it's certainly not good for a nation. It's not good for a business. It's not good for a university, right? If you're running a company and you start getting into all of this stuff and you start having to, we need to hire this many people of this color and this many people of this, and everything has to be 50-50 gender split and this and this. And maybe we need a trans person in there and we need this. The quality suffers, right? Human talent is distributed. So why not just apply the same basic standards to people and let the chips fall where they fall? And they're not going to fall perfectly evenly depending on how the society is split up. And there's a gazillion different reasons for that. And what's even funny about it is people are totally happy to recognize that in certain sectors. And then in others, the complete opposite. In others, it's totally unacceptable, right? I don't know the exact numbers, but I don't know. What percent of the NBA is made up of black men? 70 something percent probably.
Yeah,
right?
The majority,
over 70%.
big time.
Yeah, so black men are about 6% of the US population, yet they make up 70 something percent of the NBA, let's say. Nobody in their right mind, if someone were to come out and say that the NBA is racist against white people and racist against Jews and racist against Asians and racist against, they'd be laughed out the room. But that exact same logic people use in other things to make claims about racism or claims about sexism. Look at the corporate boardrooms, right? It's only 20% female and 80% male. Therefore, this must be sexism. And it's just such a low resolution, goofy way of thinking. There's millions of different reasons why people end up in all sorts of different situations. You can see this even in the same family. Take 4 or 5 kids raised in the same household by the same parents. They have different outcomes. They pursue different jobs. They end up with different incomes. Their lives look different. They behave differently. Why? Because people have freedom of choice. People have different talents. People have different interests. And that is completely normal. So I think there's a lot of individual and collective mental illness that is essentially being caused and being exacerbated by people trying to sort of juggle all of these illogical ideas in their brains simultaneously on all of these different topics, instead of just being like, oh, okay, this is just how humanity is. This is how life is. Let me go live my life and try to flourish.
It's funny you mentioned when you said that humanity peaked in the 90s and like the early 2000s. The first thought, and then you kind of alluded to it, the first thought that I had was when the iPhone came out, like right before 2010, I forget what year specifically, that's when things started to shift. Was like this access and, you know, the smartphone, social media, this access to, I think if we can be honest, here's what's really interesting about the double-edged sword of social media. I love that the playing field has been leveled for voices, right? Like you wouldn't have a voice really. I wouldn't have a voice if it wasn't for the power of social media. Well, you're smarter than me, so you probably figure out something else, maybe hook up a satellite or something. But for the rest of us, social media was a great way for the common person to begin. You didn't have to go through all the gatekeepers of Hollywood or mainstream news or whatever. The backside weakness of that is everybody has a platform, and now you see what I'm saying? Like now we're dealing with the backside, the double-edged sword of that. I would ask you, like, genuinely, do you think that social media, despite what we're seeing right now happen with humanity, do you think it's going to be a net positive for humanity, or is it a net negative?
It's too early to call it. Right now, it's a net negative, I believe. And I don't think it's a net negative because of the fault of the social media companies. Mm-hmm. I just think you've introduced a brand new tool to billions of people, and most people don't know how to use it well. So even though we've now had the combination of smartphones and social media, I would say has been relatively ubiquitous since maybe 2011, 2012, where most people have both a smartphone and some social media accounts. And we're still really early in the experiment. There are people who are more conscious and more thoughtful and more disciplined, who are very careful about how they use it and who make sure that they don't get, just caught up for 8 hours doom scrolling and doing those type of behaviors or getting addicted. So at the moment, it's only a small percentage of people who I would say use social media well. At the same time, I think there's increased awareness of the ramifications of all of this for the people who like studies and data. You're seeing how it's impacting teenage depression rates and how it's impacting anxiety and people's self-perception and so on. And so sometimes an experiment takes a while for it to run. So we still don't know. If someone were to say, what are the long-term repercussions of various types of social media use, we still probably don't have enough data. Right? We can guess certain things and we can infer certain things, but it's so new that we don't really know. And I think that the more information comes out, then, I think a lot of it is going to be generational. So yeah, I think when it comes to social media, there's going to be, and smartphones in particular as well, there's going to be some sort of generational shift where we have now lived with this technology for between 15 and 20 years. And we've seen the effects of it. We've used it ourselves and learned what are good practices, what are bad practices. And the way that we raise our children or future children with it is going to look different because we have that additional insight. So I have talked to parents who I know parents who are like, no way my kid is getting a smartphone until they're 16, 17, 18 years old. I also have spoken to parents who gave their kid one when they were 4 and it didn't have good results. I've had these conversations with people, even on my podcast, right? So to me, it seems obvious that giving a 4-year-old a smartphone is going to be a bad idea, right? I'm well aware enough of the things that exist on the internet and some of the threats and dangers that I know that from multiple angles, that's a terrible idea. But this whole experiment is just being run. So you're going to see these kids who are getting smartphones at 5 years old. When they're 20 years old, what position are they going to be in? The ones where it's delayed until they're 15 or even 18, How are they going to pan out? So sadly, I think millions of people in younger generations are being messed up and are going to be messed up as part of this experiment. But other ones are going to do very well and flourish and have significant advantages. And I prefer to stop the car or, encourage people to tap on the brakes before it veers off the cliff. But sometimes you have to kind of, you give people the warning and they go off the cliff anyway, and they need to kind of feel that pain and see the repercussions for them to come back and go, oh yeah, okay, maybe this was not the best idea. So who knows, maybe 50 years from now, it'll very clearly be a net positive for most people. But I think right now, so far, it's a net negative for most people, and it's a massive, massive net positive for a small percentage of people.
I think of like the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and how you have a lot of very high level people. I think New York Times, there was an op-ed put out recently saying that the Constitution should be done away with, or it's like, how on earth did we come to that place? But the First Amendment's so interesting because that's like the ultimate double-edged sword is, people having a freedom, a protected right in the United States to say whatever they want to say, short of screaming fire in a movie theater, right?
That you can do that, by the way.
What's that?
I know people use that example as an exception, but you can yell fire in a crowded theater.
You can legally, or you can get away with it?
As in you can, and that doesn't violate the First Amendment. People always say that as an exception to the First Amendment, but it's not an exception. You can do that as long, if you believe that there's a fire, you can absolutely say that.
Right. Yes, for sure. But there would be, if you yelled it and there wasn't, and someone got seriously hurt, I'm sure there could be legal ramifications from doing that.
I think it might be like reckless endangerment, something like that.
Yeah. So
just like shooting a gun up in the sky.
Yeah. So, but regardless, is like there's a lot of liberty. In fact, there's practically infinite liberty, or there was until kind of a few years ago. But the idea is like, hey, in order for the truth to win out, you have to allow everyone to be able to say their piece. And it's this. What's interesting from a Christian perspective is we know that, if the truth is the light, the darkness can never extinguish the light. The light extinguishes the darkness. And so for us to be able to have the freedom to speak the truth, you got to allow other people to be able to say what they want to say as well. So I love the idea of it being an ongoing experiment. I think we will see more of that unfold in the years to come. And I think that's why also what you're doing is so important, because what you do is you are, I would imagine that with your platform, you're not just getting the people who kind of live in an echo chamber to retweet and they get excited about what you say. Of course, that's going to happen to some extent. But do you have any stories, notable stories of recent memory of people that have come to you who have said that they were on a completely different wavelength of belief, whether spiritually or politically or socially, but then they started really listening to what you had to say, and then they turned the ship a little bit? Is there anything that notably comes to mind for you?
Yeah, it actually happens all the time. I can think of a few just from the last. Yeah, I can think of a few from the last couple of days. Some are, I can think of ones that are very consequential and things that are a little more minor. So today, just a few hours ago, I'm here in Dubai, and a guy I follow who's based in the U.S. with his family. He was, he's in Dubai now. He came to visit Dubai for a week. He brought his wife and his kids over, and they've had a blast time. They've had an amazing time here. So he wanted to meet up and go for lunch because we hadn't met in person. And I did ask him. I was like, "Oh, what prompted you to come visit Dubai?" And he was like, "Honestly, your tweets. I just kept seeing all of the things that you were saying, and I was like, well, we're traveling anyway. We're heading from the west to the east, so why don't we stop over in Dubai? Could be a cool place." And lo and behold, he really likes it. I've also spoken to people I spoke to a guy literally yesterday who ended up moving to Dubai because he had seen some of my tweets and things that I was saying. He's from Poland and he was living in London, and he's moved. I've met a lot of people who got into the gym through my tweets, my book, even just, I often do the posts. I just literally will just tweet, "Go to the gym," or "It's morning. Have you been to the gym?" And it's just something that I do. And there are many people I've met people in person at events who are like, hey man, like those continuous tweets, I'm lying in bed. I see Zuby tweeting, go to the gym, get your butt out of bed, go to the gym. And it just gives people that little motivation. So I've had those ones which are kind of, nice to hear, and they're a little more minor. On things that are deeper, absolutely. I've had multiple people who've told me that I have helped them out of, again, this is not even something I intentionally go out to do. I'd say perhaps the most humbling is I've had maybe 4 or 5 guys, I think they've all been men, 4 or 5 young men who have told me that I helped them, just reading my stuff and listening to my stuff helped them get out of suicidal ideation.
Wow.
Right? Just going through a really dark spot in their life and feeling like there's no hope and everything is dark and everything's negative. And I've never been there, but I can see how someone could fall into that pattern if you are just constantly consuming and focusing on the negative. And they've said, just reading your tweets, listening to your podcast, even listening to the music, like you just helped me to keep the faith and realize I should just keep going, keep fighting. Because sometimes I'll just write something that's a little bit vague, right? I might just be like, whatever you're going through, just keep going, it'll get better, right? That could be a tweet. I just put something like that. And there's someone out there, of all the people who read that, like there's someone who just needed to read that at that time. And it just gives them that little motivation. It gives them that little push. I've definitely had people who there's people who I've helped bring to Christianity, bring to the faith, or more broadly, bring to believing in God, people who are more atheistic. And, cause I realize there's a lot of people out there who have never, how would I put it? There are people out there, even in the USA itself, and even in the UK, who have, they were brought up in a very secular atheistic environment, and they didn't grow up with like knowing Christian friends or Christian families or ever going to church or whatever. And they have this very straw man view of Christianity and Christians, or maybe even just people who believe in God in general, right? That idea was like, almost like nobody smart or intelligent or educated could believe in all of this stuff, right? They kind of have that attitude. They haven't looked into it. They haven't had conversations. They haven't really thought about it that much. And then they come across somebody, it doesn't have to be me. They come across somebody who they like and they respect and they know is intelligent and they know is intellectual, and they hear that, this person believes in God. Kind of already that's sort of questioning their thing of like, I thought it was only stupid, ignorant people who believed in that, or people who are just hypocrites, or people who just want to use it as a cudgel to attack other people or whatever. There's all these views of religion and Christianity and so on, which are very, very sort of negative. Sometimes that comes from people who have experienced some type of church hurt. Maybe, they were raised in a super Catholic place, and their priest, something horrible happened to them, or they, they were treated very badly by someone in the church, or their mother or their father claimed to be a devout Christian and then they were like abusive or so, like there's all of these, there's 8 billion people in the world. There's all sorts of personal stories that people go through. So there are many reasons why people may have these sort of negative feelings and attachments to belief as a whole, or even Christianity specifically, or even a branch of Christianity specifically. So I think that, the way I operate is, I think in recent years, maybe just due to the sort of like openly demonic attacks that are going on in our culture, I speak even sort of more about my faith and about how I connect certain dots. But I've always done it. And I'm not, my approach is, I'm not a theologian. I'm not a pastor. I'm not a priest. I'm not even explicitly in my music. I'm not a gospel rapper. I talk about my faith in my songs, but I don't feel like, I haven't finished this song unless the word is Jesus is in there, or there's a Bible verse or something. I just kind of do what I do, and I operate, and I try to, I'm far from perfect like everybody else, but I try to truly live out the values, right? I try to live out the values. I try my best to treat people in a Christian manner. Even people who, you know, I get plenty of attacks. I get plenty of criticism. I've had many people try to cancel me or say that I'm something I'm not or whatever. And it gets annoying. It gets frustrating, you know, and there's different ways of dealing with it. But ultimately, on whatever platform I'm on whatever I'm doing, how I treat people in the real world, most importantly, I always try to do my best to do that in a Christian manner, with kindness, with grace. I try not to ever, even when people are being nasty towards me, I try to use the minimum force required to handle them, if that makes sense. Like sometimes, you know, sometimes you have to tell someone about themselves, but like I try not to do it in a way that's, all right, let me just completely destroy this person. You know, it's more like hey man, like watch it, you know, right? You know, and so I do my best with that, and it's tricky. And as you said, you know, we're dealing with this new paradigm where we have access to millions of people, but millions of people also have access to us. And people are going to, you know, sometimes people are reasonable. Sometimes people disagree with you in a reasonable way. Sometimes people just want to attack your character. Sometimes people just want to take you down or take you out. Or, and which is weird to me, because I don't have that in my heart, right? Like, even if I don't like someone or I don't like someone's content, like I'm not going to, hey, let me go try to get this YouTube channel deleted. Let me go try to get this person like banned from, you know, hey, like to me, that's really weird. Like that's let me go write a bunch of like nasty comments or leave a negative review on that. Like, I'm busy, man. Like I've got things to do. If I don't like something, I tend to just ignore it. Right. I'm not here trying to ban everything and everyone that I don't agree with or that I don't find wholesome. But that's not everyone's attitude. You know, there is a small percentage of people who are genuinely malicious. And that's something I think people also have to be cautious and aware of. It's relatively rare, but if something is relatively rare and you put it, you know, you might have like, what do they say? Like something like 2%, sort of estimated like 2 to 3% of the people in the world have some level of psychopathy. In the real world, that's not a, you know, you're quite unlikely to encounter that too often. But if you think that like, if 2% of people of 2 billion users of a platform are clinically psychopathic,
then,
I was
going to say 2% is a lot. 2% is a lot.
That's actually the figure. Like according to like actual psychological data, that they typically say somewhere between 2 to 3% of the population has like measurable psychopathy. And so, by the way, but
wow,
a lot of these people are individuals who end up in prison, right? Or who end up doing all the horrible stuff that we see in the world. But again, you take that 2% and you cast it across 2 billion users, and it's like, okay, there are literally millions of people out there. You know, there's billions who are totally normal and sane and whatever, but there's millions of people out there who have this sort of malice, and the way they think and the way they approach all of this is not, we can't even really relate to it because it's not a normal worldview. And then suddenly, cool, they have access to all of these people. They've got a target rich environment for them. Let me go attack that person. Let me go troll that person. Oh, let me go leave that nasty comment. And there's people who quite literally spend hours every day doing this. Like their entire online presence is dedicated. And of course, it's anonymous, right? So it's not like the real world. In the real world, that behavior gets checked very quickly. So you can't, even if you have those thoughts in your head, you can't just go around treating everybody like that, right? You have to kind of hide. But then you're online, and I think these people just, you know, they go online and they just unleash. And sometimes you're the target of that. You haven't done anything to them. You haven't done or said anything that's attacking them or hurting them, but you just become the sort of target of the day, and they go after you. And you know, that I think has to be handled in a different way, because if you're not aware that exists, I think people can naively open themselves up to sort of not protect themselves adequately, because they kind of don't want to believe that exists. And you have to be able to determine whether you're dealing with actual evil or you're just dealing with disagreement and different perspectives, and those are not the same thing. Sometimes people can conflate them. I'm sure you've had people say that you're hateful or you're some type of bigot because they disagree with you on something. That's
never. No one ever.
Yeah, yeah, like that. That's a misuse of the term, right? That's a misdiagnosis. But at the same time, there are people who genuinely are operating from that position, and you need to be able to sort of filter that out.
I wanted to ask you a couple more things, Zuby, and I thank you so much for your time. Your story has been super special to hear. You talked about your faith, and my faith. If you've seen any of my content, I wouldn't be surprised if you hadn't, but because your platform is just way bigger than mine. But my
not
faith
on YouTube, man. You're killing it, dude.
I appreciate it, man. Well, my faith in Jesus. I'm a content creator. I'm an entrepreneur, but I'm also a pastor. And so for me, helping people grow spiritually and even taking an interest in people's spiritual stories is like, it's why I'm here. And I'm interested because you talked about your faith and how your faith in Jesus as a Christian is clearly like, it's a guiding motivation for all the things that you're doing and what you're saying. And it's even making other people question their own beliefs, which I think is beautiful. Have you always been a Christian, or did that kind of happen? Did you grow up in a Christian household, or just tell me, like, because you've probably seen a lot of different people, whether they grew up in church or, they didn't. And then later in life, they had an encounter with God. There's a million different ways that you can kind of skin that cat. What's your story of faith?
Yeah, sure thing. So I grew up in a Christian household, Christian family. I'm the youngest of 5 children. And when I say Christian family, I don't even just mean my immediate family of 7 people, but even beyond that. I mean, my dad is one of 11 siblings. My mom is one of 7, if I remember correctly. So aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, all Christian, as far as I know. Maybe there's somebody lapsed in there. But I grew up going to church. I lived in Saudi Arabia. So we used to go to church on Fridays because the weekend was Thursday and Friday, not Saturday and Sunday.
Oh.
So I grew up going to church on Friday and going to Friday school, which will sound funny to lots of listeners out there. And
instead of Sunday school, you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. And
okay,
in the evening we do family prayers, which we still do. I mean, we're scattered all over the world right now, so it's not as regular, but we would pray as a family, and we had the hymnals, and we'd sing hymns and everything. So yeah, I grew up with that, and with the teachings, with the values, with the morals. And then I went to boarding school from the age of 11, and I went to a Christian school. So this is boarding school in the UK. Both the schools I went to during my 7 years, they were both Christian Church of England schools. So they had chapels. We had chapel every single morning, and then services on Sundays. And then I think, as most people go through, I think you get to that point in your life where I think there's a point where you decide if something goes from being your parents' religion to being your religion. I think this is the sort of late teens, early 20s. This is where you get a lot of people who either step away from the faith or go deeper into it. I would say with me, I've never had a time in my life where I lost my faith. Actually, I've certainly had times where I'm walking with Christ much more, and I'm much more in the Bible, and actively learning and seeking and reading and attending church. I mean, I've attended church for most of my life, but just because I travel so much and things get so busy, I've had times where it'll go a month and I'm like, I haven't been to church in a month. That's not good. I need to find one, even if it's in whatever random city I'm in, and just sort of show up. So that's been my journey, and I would say over the last 5 years, for many reasons, I've gotten deeper into my faith. And I think in the last 6 to 12 months, even more so, I'm increasingly just like, I was talking to one of my friends the other day, and I was just like, man, like the Bible is right about everything. Like it's really like Like, because
it's just funny.
I'm rereading it. So I recently finished the entire Old Testament. I've just been reading it
Nice.
front to back. So I'm currently in the book of Matthew, but I've read the whole Old Testament recently, and I'm currently in the book of Matthew. And I think as a child, and even as a young adult, you read the stories and you hear things, and you believe, you have the faith, but there's sort of a disconnection between how exactly is this all relevant right now. You're reading like ancient stories, and some of it's a bit strange and hard to penetrate, and you don't draw the exact connection between like, okay, well, we're 2,000 plus years past this. How is this still relevant? The same thing can happen when you study history. I don't know if you're like me, but when I was in school, I actually found history to be one of the boring subjects. Whereas now that I'm in my 30s, I find history to be one of the most fascinating subjects. So I think similarly, as a kid, you're like, why am I reading about what happened in 1066? Why do I care about what happened in 1545? Like, how is this relevant to me? And then, so I think similarly with the Bible and all of these stories, that can happen where there's just a disconnection. Whereas now, as I get older, as I get wiser, as I get more experience, as I go through things, as I go through ups and downs, as I see where the world, society is, as I see people taking all of these different paths and what it's leading to, you're just like, oh, that's why that rule exists. Oh, that's why that commandment is there. Not just because, 'cause again, as a child, it might just be, and I'm sure there's many people who experience this in church where it's just like, oh, well, why does this rule exist? And it might just be, oh, because, the Bible says so, because God says so, which is, that's a solid reason. But you get older and wiser and you get more experience and you realize, okay, there are real world, tangible reasons why these rules and laws and commandments exist. Because actually, if you don't do this on an individual level, let alone on a collective level, this is what it leads to. This is what happens. Again, you can look at our society, look at our culture, look at our politics, look at some of the hot button issues, look at the things people are fighting about back and forth and so on. And you think, would this be an issue if everyone followed these teachings? If everyone, like, if we lived, and I even asked this question to, atheists, right? It's like, if everyone just actually followed these teachings, whether or not you believe any of the religiosity or any of the spirituality, right? Just these actual teachings, if every man and woman was just like, okay, I will do my absolute best to just live by this, what would our society look like? And would we be dealing with all of this nonsense and nastiness and division and, all sorts of things? And it's just like, no, actually, like we wouldn't. Things would be a lot better. So I think for me, all of these dots are just connecting in a way that they didn't previously, just in a sort of practical, pragmatic way. There's the religious, spiritual aspect of it, but then there's also just the real world impact of it and the impact of the absence of it.
Yeah.
Right. As people become less religious, as society becomes less Christian, as Christian values become deemed, weird or extreme, or they're marginalized or whatever, and you're seeing what other stuff people are pursuing, it's just like, no, actually, this thing is correct. It's right. It is right for humanity. It might not always be. Yeah, in the short term, it might not always be the thing that's the most fun from a hedonic perspective, or the most exciting, or the most whatever. But actually, if you just follow this, man, it saves you a lot of pain. It saves you a lot of trouble. These lessons have already been learned thousands of years ago, and you don't need to make all of the same mistakes to relearn them. And I feel like that's where we are as a society, as a culture, right? It's like all of these lessons are being relearned in very painful, very difficult ways, where it's like, it didn't have to be that. It didn't have to be like that. And I think every modern man, every modern woman, regardless of their background, can relate to that in multiple ways.
I think of, and here's where we'll land the plane. Here's the final question I'll ask you, because you made a really interesting observation about how the principles of the Word of God, of the Bible, it's like an instruction manual for humanity. It's like, once you look at this, you're like, oh, wow. Like if there were a God, if there was a God, and he created the heavens and the earth, he created the cosmos, he created us to live inside of this ecosystem, this machine called the universe, would it be kind for him to give us an operator's manual, or would it be unkind for him to give us an operator's manual? Well, for me, I think it'd be very kind of him to show us, hey, this is how I made this thing. I made you. I made your spouse. This is how all this works together in a harmonious fashion. And what's interesting is I'm seeing this pattern of Richard Dawkins, famous atheist, has recently come out and has said that he actually would probably identify as a cultural Christian, right? As far as values and things like that. You have the Jordan Petersons, who are, over the past handful of years has become extremely religiously curious. Let's just call it that. Mm-hmm. You have Tucker Carlson, being a political commentator for most of his career. Now on his podcast, there's a flavor of spirituality in almost every live event, every episode. Joe Rogan. I was an atheist in college. So this was in 2010 through 2013. I was an atheist, and I would smoke weed 3 to 5 times a day. I would sit in my bed high out of my mind, Zuby, and I would listen to videos of Joe Rogan on YouTube ripping Christians apart, because he was a really hardcore atheist 10 or so years ago. Yeah. And now look at him. Now look at his ability to entertain the idea of a higher power, and even have people on his show talking about Christianity and him engaging in those sorts of those conversations. I say all of that because you made a comment a few minutes ago, which I thought was really, really revealing. You said a lot of the things that we're seeing happen right now, and I don't know if you said this tongue in cheek, this is where the question will come in. But you said a lot of the agendas that we see are demonically inspired. And I would my personal observation is, when the world seems to get increasingly dark and the light is dimmed, it makes people ask the question, okay, I wasn't taking the spiritual thing seriously for a while, but now I really want to know, because I can see evil running rampant. Is there an equal, or not necessarily equal, but is there an opposite force of good that I can put my trust in the midst of what we're seeing happen? I'd love for you to dig deeper into that. Do you truly think that there's a spiritual component, a spiritual warfare that's happening in the culture that's making us confused about race, pitting people against each other, even with your emphasis on health, making people fat, lazy, and sick, and then getting into the gender confusion? Do you think that this is merely people are just kind of got confused, just kind of sunk their teeth into some weird idea? Or do you think that there is a spiritual power behind what's going on that's affecting the human culture in a negative way?
Excellent question. So perhaps one of my favorite social media posts I've made of all time is, we keep looking for political realm solutions for spiritual realm problems and being surprised when they fail. So yes, I absolutely believe that there is spiritual warfare going on. I know the concept of the 7 deadly sins is more of a Catholic thing, but when you look at it, all of the 7 deadly sins are pretty much encouraged and promoted by our society and by our culture, which is like, that's pretty dark. I mean, there's literally a Pride Month, and I don't know how many days dedicated to it, right? Pride, lust, greed, gluttony, sloth, like wrath. All of these things are encouraged and promoted. There's an inversion going on. So, in the Bible, it says, woe to those who call good evil and those who call evil good. And I see that. I see that all day long. Like, it's happening. It's coming from politicians. It's coming from the media. It's coming from movies. It's coming from music. It's coming from academia. All of these things. There's this massive inversion agenda going on. And I also think, Kap, like, there's a lot of things that, how would I put it? There are so many things that don't logically and rationally seem to make sense. So, I found that even people who are like more, kind of agnostic are noticing this. You kind of touched on this. They're just like, man, like, evil is real. Like some of this stuff just seems, there are people who don't believe demons even exist, but they're like, man, like for lack of a better term, this seems demonic. This seems evil. This seems wicked. Like what is going on here? And so, it seems clear to me that there's are additional forces. And dude, every human society pretty much has always believed in the concept of spiritual warfare, even outside of Christianity, right? Just like all religious peoples in history all around the world have always had this idea of like angels and demons, or the good gods and the bad gods, or like there's some type of force or spirits that exist out there that can be within people or outside of people that push and sway things in these different directions. And I think in our sort of pride and arrogance and thinking that we know everything all because we're smart and we're educated and we have technology and science and whatever, people think that everything can be answered just with science and rationality and materialism and so on. And I don't believe that. I think that science is a great thing and has come up with incredible solutions and will continue to. Technological advancement is generally a good thing. I love human ingenuity and entrepreneurship and all of these things, but I just think there are elements of the world and of the universe that we cannot see and that we don't fully understand. It's why, like, I think even if I were not, it's always hard to know who we would be if we were not raised the way that we were.
Sure.
But I think that even if I were not raised by a Christian family and, amongst other Christians or anything, I think if I would, at a minimum, certainly by this stage of my life, I would like at least be agnostic. I'd at least be like, there's something going on, right? Maybe I don't know what I consider the true religion, but like, I don't think it's just the materialism. I don't think it's just what we can see in science. Like, I think there are answers and questions that are, we just don't know. I think this is where someone like Joe Rogan lands, right? Like he's not, he's not a follower of Christ, but I think he's increasingly like, there's more to this than I thought. And, and there's also just we don't know. I don't know. Like, I don't know everything. I have my beliefs. I have my faith. But with me, there's always a degree of humility with it all. And I've actually had, I've had fellow Christians even get upset with me for saying some of these things, right? Because people want you to be like as absolutely convicted and as, devout as they are in every way. And I'm like, my faith is very strong, but I maintain that, hey, I don't ultimately, I don't know. I don't know, right? Like if someone is like, Zuby, do heaven and hell exist? I'm like, yeah, I believe that. I absolutely believe that. Can I give you a mathematical proof of it? Or can I show you? Can I just be like, hey bro, like, look, here's heaven, here's like, no, I can't, right? So there's an element of humility of, and even if the concepts, even if I could somehow prove that the concepts exist, I don't know exactly what it looks like, right? We have artists' renditions of what people think heaven looks like, what people think hell looks like, right? There's some descriptions in the Bible and so on, but I think there's a lot of stuff that the human brain just struggles to even understand. Like we sort of know what infinity means, but we also don't. The human brain can't really wrap its head around infinity because we're used to things being limited.
Yeah,
we're used to numbers, right? Yeah, we're finite with the concept that something can like always have existed and always exist. It's like, wait, but everything's got a beginning and an end. Like, and so to me, God is like that times every other dimension. So even when we talk about God, I think this is where Jordan Peterson, I think this is why he doesn't like that question of, do you believe in God? And, I understand why some people get upset with him because they want him to just like confirm it, just say it, just say the thing, right? But I think I know why he dances around it a little. And I think it's because like his brain is so sort of high wired that he's just like, number one, what does that even mean? Like if I think of infinity and infinite different dimensions, what does that even mean conceptually? And then what does it mean in terms of my life? Like, if that is what God is, and these are the commands, and what, like, gosh, like am I even, especially if, because he often talks about how belief and action are kind of the same thing, right? So it's like, okay, well, if you truly, truly, truly believe that, then like we should all be like the most hardcore, like the most devout, like the most zealous people out there, and almost like in everything, like it just consumes all of these things. And that's like, whoa, that's kind of scary. How am I supposed to live in the world and engage in the world if I'm like that, like that deep into it? So I don't know. I feel like I'm ranting a little, but I'm just sort of sharing the ideas as they're popping into my brain right now. So hopefully I have answered the question at some point in this in this dialogue.
You have for sure.
Okay.
You have. I'm rooting for you, man. I want to see you continue to prosper and thrive in what you're doing. I think you're a really important voice in these days. And my personal encouragement to you, man, is I think you're seeing, if you're seeing sort of an uptick in your audience respond to you because of your openness about your faith, my encouragement to you, man, would be to lean in, because you and I know, and I love the humility of like, there's certain things that we can't prove, but when you have a relationship with this higher power, when you have a relationship with God, that when you're praying, you're not just speaking to an empty void, but there's a connection happening there. And you and I both know that we were created to have that connection with our Creator. And my encouragement to you, man, would be, as the Holy Spirit leads with the wisdom that He's given you, continue to share that, because ultimately, whether, like you said it yourself in your that tweet that you put out that really took off, or you're really proud of, this isn't, the problems that we see are not going to be fixed politically. They're going to be fixed spiritually. So dude, I'm honored that you take time to hang out with me today. I want to just give you an opportunity right now. What's a call to action that you'd like to invite people to get to take with you? Is it to follow you, check out your music? You're free to use this platform right now to invite people to take a next step.
Oh, thank you. Well, follow me on social media at Zuby Music. That is ZUBY Music. I'm very active on X. I'm also on YouTube and Instagram. And man, I have too many things. I don't want to overload people. Follow me at Zuby Music, and check out zubymusic.com. There's links to everything on there. There's links to my music, links to my podcast, all that. zubymusic.com. Just remember Zuby Music, and you can find me.
Awesome. Zuby, thanks so much for taking time today. This was fun.
Nice one, Kap. I appreciate you, man. Thank you.